Ever lie in bed replaying the same conversation for the 100th time, or stressing about decisions you haven't even made yet? Overthinking isn't harmless. It's stealing your time, your sleep, and your confidence. The Stoics knew how to break free, and today, you'll learn their method. Overthinking feels like an act of care. We tell ourselves we're preparing, rehearsing, protecting. But most of the time it's a slow-motion trap. You replay a conversation, imagine a dozen worst-case scenarios, and convince yourself that this mental rehearsal is useful. It isn't. It's a thief that takes energy, time, and action. Think about a typical evening. You get into bed, and a single sentence from the day returns to haunt you. You twist it, dissect it, assign meaning to tone and pause. You imagine how you should have answered, better comebacks, kinder responses, or sharp retorts. You tell yourself this will make you ready next time. Instead, it keeps you stuck. Your mind is on a loop, and life passes by. Overthinking causes 3 clear harms. First, it creates paralysis. When you obsess over every angle, you delay decisions that matter. A delayed job application, a postponed phone call, a relationship conversation held off because you want the perfect moment. These are moments surrendered to fear. Second, it steals mental energy. The attention you spend replaying scenarios is attention not spent building skills, relationships, or rest. You become efficient at imagining problems and inefficient at solving them. Third, it damages sleep and health. Nighttime rumination raises stress hormones and reduces recovery, leaving you more vulnerable the next day. Here's a small, modern example. You get an email from a client that reads politely, a little curt. You overthink. You draft a defensive reply, delete it, and write another. You imagine they are unhappy. You imagine your reputation is at risk. You spend hours worrying. In the end, the client sends a short, neutral message, and everything is fine. You spent a night of peace and several hours of focus on something that only existed inside your head. Overthinking also feeds the illusion of control. It masquerades as preparation. When you imagine every possible outcome, you feel like you've done the work to control the future. But that is a mirage. The future is shaped by many variables you don't command: other people's moods, plain chance, timing. Wrestling with every what-if turns into a false sense of security. You confuse activity with progress. This matters because chronic overthinking changes who you are over time. It rewires your habits so you postpone action, avoid risk, and prioritize imagined threats over lived experience. You stop learning. You stop testing. You stop collecting the small wins that actually build confidence. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, know this: the feeling of overthinking is not a character flaw, but a sign your mind is trying to protect you. It thinks that by rehearsing every disaster, it is keeping you safe. Stoic practice gives a better option. Instead of rehearsing what you can't control, it teaches you to focus the mind on what you can do and then to act. That shift is small but powerful. It breaks the loop and brings you back to living. Stoic perspective on overthinking. Stoicism offers a surprisingly modern lens for a very modern problem. The Stoics were practical philosophers. They weren't satisfied with clever ideas that didn't change daily life. At the heart of their thought is a simple, clear distinction. Some things are in our control, and some things are not. This principle, repeated across Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, is a direct antidote to overthinking. Epictetus made the distinction the core of his teaching. He asked students to notice where their influence truly ended. Thoughts, judgments, choices, effort, and character, these are inside your control. Other people's opinions, outcomes, random events, these are not. Overthinking happens when the mind crosses that boundary and starts grinding on external events as if one small thought could fine-tune everything. Marcus Aurelius modeled a different piece of the Stoic response: action over rehearsal. He counseled himself to focus on what he could do in the present moment and to avoid being hijacked by imagined scenarios. That practical tenderness, a ruler reminding himself to keep his attention where it helps, is the tone we want when we address our own anxiety. It's not harsh, it's disciplined and kind. Seneca added urgency to the mix. He warned about time wasted on imagined futures and told readers that life is shorter when spent in worry. His writing reads like a wake-up call for anyone spinning through what-ifs. He wanted people to reclaim their hours and to use them for meaningful effort rather than mental rehearsals of catastrophe. To see how this applies today, imagine a common modern scene. You're preparing for a performance review. The calendar, the clothes, the presentation slides are all controllable and useful to prepare. But inventing narratives about how the boss will judge you, imagining catastrophic interpretations of a neutral comment, or rehearsing a dozen perfect retorts to potential criticisms, these are wasted cycles. Stoicism says, do the preparation you can, then return to what you control next. Another Stoic lesson is perspective. The Stoics used practices like negative visualization not to worry, but to build gratitude and resilience. By briefly imagining possible setbacks, you reduce the sting if they happen and learn to value what is present. It sounds like a version of overthinking, but the aim is different. This is intentional, bounded, and controlled. It short-circuits the catastrophic spiral by showing you that you can handle loss or disappointment. The Stoic stance is neither denial nor fatalism. It accepts reality and asks one practical question: where can my energy actually change something? That question, asked repeatedly, trains the mind to stop spinning on illusions of control. In practice, this builds a calmer attention, clearer choices, and a willingness to act despite uncertainty. Stoic practice doesn't remove problems, but recalibrates your relationship with them so you aren't immobilized by thought. These steps are simple, but require repetition to stick. Practice them every day. Step 1. Separate what you control from what you don't. The first Stoic move is blunt and freeing. Make a clear separation. When worry starts, draw 2 columns in your mind or on paper. Label one column control and the other not control. Be specific. This isn't a vague meditation exercise, it's a practical triage system for your attention. Start with a situation you're overthinking. Write down the facts as neutrally as possible. Next, in the control column, list only the things you can actually act on. This might include your preparation, your tone, the time you choose to act, or the skills you build. In the not control column, put the bits you are tempting yourself to worry about: another person's feelings, the weather, a decision someone else will make, or purely hypothetical outcomes. Take a job interview example. You can control arriving on time, the clarity of your answers, and the research you do on the company. You cannot control the interviewer's mood, their hiring timeline, or a competitor's performance. Once listed this way, your mind has permission to stop chewing on the not control items. They belong to the unknown pile, and worrying about them does not change their reality. This exercise has 2 immediate effects. First, it reduces mental clutter. Naming what you control is like turning on a light in a dark room. You suddenly see steps you can take. Second, it rules out futile rehearsals. With the not control column visible, your mental energy naturally shifts away from scenarios that produce no useful outcome. Practice a disciplined language around control. Replace, "What if they think I'm incompetent?" with, "What can I do to communicate clearly?" Replace, "What if this fails?" with, "What steps will I take if it does?" The wording matters because it moves you from imagining to planning. Planning is a form of action. Imagining is often a form of avoidance. If you prefer a quick rule of thumb, use a 2-question test. Ask, "Is this within my influence? Can I take one specific action that would change the outcome?" If the answer to either question is no, drop it from your to-do list of worries and either set a tiny check-in time later or let it go entirely. You can also turn the exercise into a habit for decisions. Start a morning page with a short control list for the day. At night, review what you tried to control and what you let go. The more you practice, the faster your mind will sort items automatically, and you will spend less time spinning. This practice is small but powerful because it replaces diffuse anxiety with clear choices. It doesn't remove hard feelings, but it locates your energy where it can produce change. When overthinking used to feel like a storm, the 2-column exercise becomes a map that shows where to walk and where to shelter. With regular use, it rewires your response. The moment a worry appears, you mentally ask which column it belongs to and act from there. Do this consistently, and it becomes automatic. Your mind sorts faster. Step 2. Limit thinking time. One of the sneaky things about overthinking is that it fills the day unless you give it boundaries. Stoics were masters of setting limits on mental activity. They treated worrying like a task with a deadline. A sharp time boundary turns a sprawling rumination into focused reflection. Introduce a thinking window. Decide how long you will allow yourself to analyze an issue, then stop. The length can vary by importance: 5 minutes for small annoyances, 20 or 30 minutes for bigger problems. The point is not the exact number, but the habit of giving worry a slot and then moving on. Seneca argued for decisive living. He advised cutting off indecision and acting. The thinking window is a modern, practical translation of that idea. It prevents the mind from rehearsing endlessly by forcing a decision. Think now, act later, or take a specific step at the end of the window. Here's how to use it. When a looping thought begins, set a timer and give it your full attention during that window. Write down what you fear, map possible responses, and list one concrete action you can take. When the timer ends, commit to either acting on that single item or shelving the rest for a later, scheduled review. No rumination outside the window. Work with simple, clear rules so you don't cheat. If you set a 15-minute window, avoid the temptation to just check for another 10 minutes. The goal is to train your mental discipline. That discipline builds over repeated practice and gives you back hours of attention you otherwise lose. This method guards against perfection paralysis. Overthinkers often believe that longer thinking equals a better decision, but endless thinking dilutes practical judgment. A focused window demands priority. It forces you to pick the most relevant information and a reasonable next step. Decisions become cleaner because you stop seeking impossible certainty. The thinking window works well with the 2 columns exercise. Use the window to sort which items you control and which you do not. Then plan the action you will take on what's controllable and place uncontrollable items on your worry shelf. Pairing both techniques creates a compact workflow: sort, decide, act. A useful variation is the overnight rule. If your thinking window is late in the day, give yourself permission to sleep on the problem and revisit it in the morning's window. Often the fresh perspective of a new day reveals solutions or reduces the problem's emotional weight. Finally, guard against replaying the window. If a thought returns outside of its slot, remind yourself of the rule briefly and redirect your attention. Over time, those redirects become automatic, and you reclaim long stretches of uninterrupted focus. Limiting thinking time is not cold or dismissive. It is a form of respect for your attention and your life. It helps you trade wasted hours for deliberate action and calmer presence. Step 3. Focus on present action. Stoicism is action-oriented. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to confine thoughts to the present and to ask, "What can I do right now?" Overthinking makes the mind a movie projector of hypotheticals. The remedy is to turn thought into small, immediate action. Even tiny steps break the loop. Start with a grounding question. What is one concrete thing I can do in the next 10 minutes? Make the action so small it feels almost trivial. Call a person to clarify one fact. Open one file and write the first sentence. Stretch and breathe for 3 minutes. These micro-actions are tiny commitments that create momentum. They show the brain that movement is possible and worthwhile. Action reduces anxiety for 2 reasons. First, it produces information. When you act, you get feedback. The unknown shrinks because reality answers you. Second, action interrupts the habit loop. Overthinking is a patterned response. A small physical step breaks the pattern and gives your mind a different task. Use present action rules for decisions. For instance, if you are stuck on whether to speak up in a meeting, pick a specific contribution and speak it. If you are unsure about applying for a role, send a short application noting you will follow up in 3 days. The objective is not always success, it is clarity. You will know more after the step than you did before. Pair this with a simple grounding routine to center your attention. Name 3 things you can see, 2 sounds you hear, and 1 thing you can touch. Then ask that single question, what can I do right now? The routine brings you back from hypothetical futures to the immediacy of the present. Action needn't be dramatic to be meaningful. In relationships, a short, honest message is more effective than rehearsing every possible text for hours. In work, a 20-minute focused sprint often moves a project farther than a day of anxious planning. The goal is steady, forward motion, not perfection. There is a subtle courage in this practice. It asks you to risk being imperfect in order to be real. Stoics did not demand flawless action. They asked for consistent engagement. When you choose present action, you accept uncertainty and test your capacity to handle it. Each small test builds tolerance for ambiguity and reduces the power of imagined catastrophes. If a setback happens after action, respond with another small step rather than a spiral. For example, if a pitch is rejected, ask 1 question for feedback or send a brief thank you note. If a conversation goes poorly, message to clarify 1 detail or schedule a short call. These follow-up steps keep you learning instead of looping. Over time, these tiny experiments accumulate into competence. You will notice that you stop predicting disaster and begin collecting small results that act as proof. Step 4. Reframe uncertainty as opportunity. Most overthinking is a fear of the unknown dressed up as preparation. We imagine all the ways things could go wrong and treat those images like warnings. Stoics proposed a different emotional posture. Uncertainty is an arena for practicing courage and adaptability. When you change your relationship with the unknown, worry loses its charge. Start by naming what scares you about uncertainty. Often, it isn't the unknown itself, but the imagined damage it might cause to identity or status, the fear of looking foolish, failing, or losing approval. Once named, ask, what could I gain if this uncertainty turns good? Noting potential upside balances the mental ledger and reduces anxiety's bias toward loss. Stoics used a practice called negative visualization. It sounds paradoxical, but it's purposeful. Imagine a possible loss briefly and deliberately so that if it happens, you are prepared. This short exercise reduces shock and builds muscle memory for resilience. Importantly, it is a bounded practice done with intention, unlike rumination, which is endless and directionless. Another practical reframe is to treat uncertainty as a training ground. If your goal is growth, then new and unclear situations are precisely the opportunities you want. Starting a business, moving cities, beginning a relationship, each is a field test for your skills. Expect discomfort, expect mistakes, but also expect learning. This mental shift makes risk bearable and interesting instead of catastrophic. Use language that invites exploration. Replace "I can't handle not knowing" with "I can learn from this uncertainty" or "This is a chance to practice." The words you choose subtly shape your physiology and attention. The body relaxes when the mind interprets a situation as manageable rather than deadly. Practically, set curiosity goals alongside risk goals. For a new job, your curiosity goal might be to ask 2 thoughtful questions in your first week. For a new relationship, it could be to reveal 1 small personal detail early on to see how the other person responds. Curiosity decouples your sense of self from the outcome and turns the experience into data rather than verdict. Here's a short exercise to practice. When a future fright appears, write 2 columns of possible outcomes, worst case and best case, then write 1 tiny experiment that explores the middle. Schedule the experiment within a week. Doing this repeatedly trains your tolerance and gives your brain evidence that the unknown can be managed. Over time, this habit changes your default response. Instead of habitually rehearsing every disaster, you start scanning for possibilities and taking small, curious steps forward, and steady teacher. Step 5. Accept imperfection. Perfectionism fuels overthinking. If your standard is flawless, decisions stay pending, and action is postponed indefinitely. Stoics counseled acceptance of nature, amor fati, love of fate, which invites you to embrace what happens, including mistakes. Accepting imperfection reduces the pressure that makes the mind spin. Start by noticing when perfectionism shows up as a mental voice. It might say, "I should get this exactly right," or, "If I make this mistake, they will judge me." When you recognize that voice, label it compassionately. Saying, "That's perfectionism talking," separates you from the demand and weakens its authority. Next, practice small acts of boldness that accept imperfection. Send the imperfect draft. Call the person without rehearsing the conversation. Publish a short video without fixing every pixel. Each imperfect act teaches you that failure is not fatal. Often the consequences are smaller than the imagined catastrophe, and sometimes the imperfect move produces something valuable you wouldn't have created under the safety of endless revision. Stoics did not encourage sloppy or careless action. They encouraged right effort without attachment to results. The distinction matters. Do your best within constraints, and then release the expectation that the world will reward that effort exactly as you hoped. This release is freeing. It turns energy into practice, not into a performance judged only by external approval. A practical exercise is to adopt a good enough rule for small tasks. For emails, set a 2-paragraph limit and send when those are done. For design work, pick a clear endpoint and stop. For conversations, aim for clarity over rhetorical perfection. Use timers or checklists to enforce these bounds so your standards serve productivity rather than stall it. Another useful shift is reframing failure as information. When something goes wrong, ask 2 questions. What did I learn? And what will I change next time? This reframing converts shame into a curriculum. It replaces the loop of self-criticism with a forward-looking habit of iteration. Real acceptance also includes compassion for yourself. Stoicism is often misread as cold. In practice, it asks for steady self-kindness. You take responsibility for action without beating yourself up for outcomes. This balanced attitude prevents the guilt spiral that can follow an imperfect choice. Consider concrete scenes where this helps. A parent worrying about every decision can pick one reasonable approach and watch how the child responds instead of cycling through endless options. A speaker can accept a messy first talk and commit to improving one element next time. An entrepreneur can publish a minimal version and gather feedback rather than polishing privately forever. Try a 3-step micro-plan. Select one task where perfection blocks you, set a strict time or size limit, and commit to one imperfect step this week. Repeat the plan weekly and notice how small imperfect actions slowly build confidence and quiet the thinking mind. Finally, notice the cumulative effect. Each time you accept imperfection, you weaken the association between mistakes and identity. You become someone who experiments, learns, and adapts. Overthinking loses its audience because your attention moves to doing rather than doubting. The path to quieter mind is paved with imperfect steps taken consistently. Daily Stoic practice to prevent overthinking. Consistency converts tools into character. A handful of habits practiced daily prevents overthinking from regaining its hold. The Stoics were ritual-oriented for this reason. Small, repeated practices train attention and emotion. Below is a simple daily routine that keeps the mind clear and resilient. Morning journaling. Start the day with 5 to 10 minutes of writing. Use the 2 columns exercise as a quick warm-up. List 3 items you can control today and 3 you can't. Then choose one controllable task to prioritize. This brief practice sets intention and reduces the urge to ruminate about the day's uncertainties because you already have a plan for your energy. Midday check-in. Pause for a 2-minute reset. Notice if your mind is spinning, and if it is, use a short thinking window. Give yourself a focused 5 to 20-minute slot to address whatever is looping and then return to work. These micro breaks keep worry from expanding into the whole day. Evening review. Spend 5 minutes reviewing where your attention went. Note any overthinking episodes and ask what triggered them. Did lack of sleep, hunger, or uncertainty about a relationship start the loop? Record one small adjustment you can make tomorrow to reduce the trigger. This reflection is not self-blame. It is data collection and corrective practice. Weekly planning. Once a week, spend 20 minutes on a broader scan, update your control list, identify recurring worry patterns, and schedule a small experiment to test a change. The weekly rhythm gives space for learning and prevents reactive cycles where every new worry feels like a crisis. Physical practices. Stoicism always balanced thought with bodily discipline. Regular movement, sleep, and breath work reduce the raw emotional fuel that feeds overthinking. Even a short walk after a thinking window helps the nervous system settle and gives perspective. Companionship and accountability. Share the 2 columns exercise or your weekly experiment with a friend or mentor. Speaking the worry out loud often reveals its smallness. A trusted person can help you distinguish useful planning from rumination and hold you to scheduled thinking windows. Gratitude and negative visualization. End your day by noting 2 things you're grateful for and 1 minor negative you briefly imagined and survived. This combination builds appreciation and teaches that you can face discomfort without catastrophe. Here are specific prompts to make the routine actionable. In the morning, write, "Today I can control," and list 3 items. During the thinking window, ask, "What 1 step will I take now?" In your evening review, answer, "What did I overthink today, and what did I actually do instead?" Keep a real or digital worry shelf and assign revisit dates. When a worry returns outside its slot, use a physical cue, hand on chest and 3 slow breaths, then say, "Not now." Over weeks, these small practices reorganize your attention and free time for living. You've now learned a practical Stoic method to stop overthinking. The approach consists of 5 concrete moves that work together to reclaim attention and turn worry into useful action. These methods are not philosophical abstractions. They are short, repeatable habits you can practice every day to change how your mind spends its energy. Start with a quick recap. First, separate what you can control from what you cannot. This clarifies where to spend your energy. Second, set a limited thinking window so worry has a slot and does not expand to fill the day. Third, focus on present action. Pick a tiny step you can take immediately to create feedback and momentum. Fourth, reframe uncertainty as opportunity. Treat unknowns as experiments. Fifth, accept imperfection and prioritize right effort over flawless outcomes. Put the steps together into a simple routine. In the morning, do a short 2 columns write-up. During the day, use the thinking window for a specific knot of worry. When anxious, ask yourself the grounding question: what can I do right now? In the evening, review 1 imperfect step you took and record what you learned. Once a week, plan a small experiment to reframe a persistent fear and measure the result. If you stumble, treat setbacks as data and respond with small corrections. Notice triggers and design micro-interventions. A breathing cue, a 10-minute focused slot, or a brief conversation with someone you trust. Accountability helps. Share a single weekly experiment with a friend and ask them to check in. Tiny, visible commitments and gentle accountability accelerate habit change. Look for simple markers of progress. Sleep becomes less interrupted by replayed scenes. Decisions require less time and less drama. You complete more small tasks and learn from the outcomes. Those are signs that attention is moving from imagined catastrophes to actual life. The Stoic aim is not to sterilize feeling, but to place it under practical governance so you can act with clarity. This method is meant to be patient and incremental. Don't expect overnight transformation, expect steady improvement. Train attention like a muscle, short, focused practice repeated over weeks and months. The reward is a quieter mind, faster decisions, and more time for things that matter. Start with one small step tomorrow and give it a week. Keep it simple, be curious about the results, and iterate. Consider how this might work in real life. In a career decision, use 2 columns to separate what you can prepare for and what you cannot. Set a 2-hour thinking window to make a choice, then take one practical step, such as sending an email or scheduling a meeting. In relationships, use present action. A short, honest message or a quick conversation can replace hours of mental rehearsal. When facing creative work, accept an imperfect draft and invite feedback rather than polishing in private, and watch progress unfold. Over months, the changes compound and you will find your attention naturally steadier and your choices clearer. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Seneca.